Hi friends, it's Deanna Williston with Our Blooming Catholic Life, and today I'm doing a little bit of a book review, a little bit of an overview of a history of Zimbabwe. Not even going to try and say the name. Sorry, I just have no idea. I'm at a loss. So if you've been following me at all, especially our Water Wednesday shows, I have been researching the Well for Africa project. Long story. If you're a fan, you've seen it. If not, hey, maybe you can catch some slightly older shows and see about my well problems and all. So I started looking at a secular Franciscan water project, and the Well for Africa project right now is in Zimbabwe. And I was like, I know nothing about Zimbabwe. You remember I told you before, it had this picture of this man on it before, and I had to know more. But before I let myself read this book, I read this book. It was published in 2014, so it has a history pretty far back and then until 2014. So let's just do our regular overview, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about my thoughts of the book. I cannot judge the fairness of the content of the book because I have no background on the history of Zimbabwe at all. Like, my history of Africa knowledge comes from, and I know I've said this before, the TV show As Time Goes By, and that was Kenya, and still not very much, and the book Out of Africa, and a person that I met once, and one of my professor's friends, his name was Manu Uganstu, and he was from Uganda and came to talk to us my freshman year in college, and wow, that's my knowledge of Africa. You know, a little bit of Egypt, but even Egypt seems so different from other areas, right? So, History of Zimbabwe, I think this is a fair book. It looks at many different angles inside. I think it's a fair history book, but again, my knowledge is so limited, I can't really talk to that. The author tells us in the beginning that there's currently no single volume history of Zimbabwe that has a detailed coverage of the country's experience from pre-colonial times to the present. So he looks at it not just in one sense. He does look social, economic, and political history, and even looks at trends. It's just honestly, the book is mind-blowing. I will say that. We'll get into that a little bit more. Says that this is a professor from the University of Pretoria, and it was published by Cambridge University Press. I think I told you already it was from 2014. Yes. Okay. To my family, friends, and hundreds of students who have helped shape some of the ideas presented in this book through their searching questions, thought-provoking challenges, and debates. So he's taken a lot of people's input in making this. The contents tells you right away it's a little bit different than most of ours. It has figures, tables, maps, acknowledgements, timeline, notable figures in Zimbabwean history, and then it does basically a timeline, run through time, you know. Start with Zimbabwe in historical perspective, and it starts early states like around 900 to 1900. And then, you know, it's just time periods, and then there's a conclusion. So the introduction is a little bit of an overview, and same with the conclusion. Then there's a select bibliography and an index in the back. So the figures, they aren't really the figures. They just tell you where they are and their titles and their page number. And same for the tables. So if you need to find one of those in a hurry, you can just grab the front of the book. The list of tables actually, I don't know why they have this giant gap here, because the list of tables actually goes onto the back. Maps, there's not as many maps. The acknowledgements, very short for a book, right? Very short. The timeline, I thought it was going to be a full out timeline. Sorry, homeschoolers, it's not our blank book timeline. It's like written out like this. Nah. I like timelines, sorry. Homeschooling has gotten me that way. It starts at 850 with, see, I can't even say these words. The leopard Kopje tradition emerges in southwestern Zimbabwe. It does say the timeline is constructed from the BBC News Zimbabwe profile timeline, and it gives you the website they used for that. So maybe it's written out in the regular form. Anyway, so it goes from 850 all the way back to 2009. Notable figures. So they get like these great little short bios, so you're trying to follow the current news. This is going to be super useful to you. So it gives the person's name, they're in alphabetical order, gives you some dates, and then a little biography of the person. Trying to see if there's the abbreviations. This is a decent section. That one I showed you was really short, but like this one on Ian Douglas Smith starts here, goes all the way down there, and on to a next page. So some of these are very long, and some of them are fairly short. No. Very interestingly, that's one thing I would add to the book then is they use so many acronyms. I'd like to see, I don't think that was in the back either. I would love to see just a short little index of acronyms. Not here. Jumps into Introduction Zimbabwe in Historical Perspective. Okay, so here's the Deanna critique. These little title headers here, they're so small. They are the same font as the rest of the book. They're in bold. That's it. I need more organization than that. I found it was hard. When you're reading it, like they stand out when you're flipping through, but when you're trying to read it, it's not, and it's not always the most description. Like this says religion and culture, but I think that could have been a little more clear. Here's an example of one of the maps. And that one's showing you some of the different, I think those are the current city names. It's interesting. I will note at this part, because it is the introduction, I'm going to read this straight from the book. Bear with me, friends. Like most African countries, if you had knowledge of this, raise your hand. Notice my hand is not raised. I had no knowledge of this. Like most African countries, Zimbabwe is an artificial creation of Western colonialism, which drew its present boundaries without any real understanding of the demographic, cultural realities on the ground. As such, it lacked a homogeneous pre-colonial ethnic, or cultural united entity, and instead brought together different cultures and ethnicities into an imagined country to be called Rhodesia. It is therefore not possible to speak of a collective Zimbabwean culture, but only of Zimbabwean cultures, which is much harder to say. And they do kind of start out with 200 BC, even though all along they've been saying something else up until now, right? And then it does tell you there were Stone Age hunter-gatherers called the San as far back as 200 BC. So it goes very briefly to some very primitive groups until you get into some cultures that are still around. The introduction is only a few short pages, and then you're in the early states, and then it's marked by an introduction. Not cool. Like you just had an introduction. Your next chapter 2 can't also have an introduction. You could call it something else, right? Like overview, something else. That's where it gets confusing. I will note, because this has come up in where I'm editing things. See how your block quotes? This one's not indented, but you can see it uses a different font size and line spacing when it's a block quote. I do also like mine indented, but that's just me. There are footnotes. You know I'm a huge fan of footnotes right now. I always caveat that. You never know. Could change. The pictures, this one's really hard to see. Oh, it actually shows up better on camera of some of the early pre-colonial rock art. Yeah, and so sometimes you'll have an overview of a chapter. He's calling them introductions, but there'll be an overview. And then it'll go back in time to the beginning of that time, right? Time period, whatever it is. And then you may have something on the social life, and then you might have a section on economic life. So you go back and forth in time a lot. It took me a while to get used to that, and it's not the most clear presentation of the material for me, because it's the very first time I'm seeing it. So to me, that's confusing, but if you're already familiar with it, that might be fine for you. That is my only critique there. So I did start adding my own headers off to the side. This is the section that's now going to talk about the Portuguese. There's another one that's talking about a Torah state, but I wanted to know what was important about that was actually the products there. And so I emphasized that. I added some movie references in the correct time. Sometimes my substitute headers were a date. Sometimes it was just something that made that paragraph more relevant to me than the stuff on the side. And sometimes it referred to, if there was a map or something, it tells you in the line of text, look at map 2.1, but I put it in the margins, so it's like, bam, I know what it's saying. And if that map it's referring to is like on the next page, I put like an arrow. again, because I've not seen this before, so I need some organizational help that's not here. Yeah, and that's my only real critique in here is the organization wasn't the clearest for me, being a brand new student to Zimbabwean history. This book isn't aimed at me. It's aimed at being a history book at the college level in Africa. And so it probably makes perfect sense for them, but for me, I needed more organization, more structure, so that I could easily understand and find my way in the book. Like I say, after that, I think it's great. And I will say that partially because I've since started, there's a lot going on in Zimbabwe in right now. Like right now, I don't know when you're watching this. This is August of 2020. Zimbabwe is in a bit of a crisis right now. And so I can follow the news decently. I'm getting the references of the people and the political parties, and some of them referring to historical events, and it's making sense to me. So am I like going to go out and get a job in Zimbabwean economics or politics? No, but it helps me to make intelligent decisions and choices, I feel like anyway. And I've started talking to some people from Zimbabwe, and so I feel like it's helping, and I'm asking them, right? We've talked about before building relationships, so I made some friends on social media, and we're just kind of sharing ideas back and forth, and it's interesting to have that, because I'm not asking them to give me this whole background. I'm like, talk about now, and so that's where it is. Do I think it's an excellent book and totally worthwhile reading? Absolutely. Can I tell you 100% that I'm sure that everything in it is true and unbiased? I can't. It is probably the most fair representation I've ever seen, and that's what I really liked about it. I did really like the fairness. When I went to look for books on Zimbabwean history, some of them were obviously skewed towards one ethnicity or one skin color, and it was kind of awful. This was the only book I could find that even looked fair, and after reading it, I feel like it's fair. So if you're from Zimbabwe or England or somewhere and you have read this book and you have your take on it, put it down in the comments below so we know a little bit more about it. If you're this author or know about this author, that would be great to shoot something down there as well. Otherwise, I'm going to recommend this book to everyone. Is Zimbabwe relevant right now? Yes. Is it relevant for everyone? Yes. It really, really is. I'm just going to totally encourage you. Was it hard to get through? The organizational structure, for me, again, this is to be used as a college textbook. The organizational structure did not make it super accessible. But if you remember, I rewarded myself. After I read this, I got to read this biography of Servant of God, John Bradburn. And this was my reward. And this book is so captivating and it's impossible to put down. And so this was my reward. There's also a reward of I can talk to people from Zimbabwe and not look like a complete and total idiot. So you get that benefit as well, but you could set any reward for yourself that you like. God bless you, friends. I hope you have a blessed day. I hope you get out there. I hope you read this book on the history of Zimbabwe and just open your heart to people around the world. There are brothers and sisters and they're people just like us. So get out there and learn their history. That's it. Okay. God bless you all.